In chapter 7, the select group of God's servants, the 144,000, are now sealed and protected for their ministry during the upcoming judgments. Now, with this complete, the Lamb opens the seventh seal, which prepares the seven angels with the seven trumpets. And we see then the opening of the seventh seal, which is the preparation of the seven angels with seven trumpets. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. John now sees the seventh seal open, and complete silence covers heaven itself. The amount of time that seems to have passed was about a half an hour. Now, this half hour may be a reference to the time of temple worship when a priest would begin his work inside the holy place. And that would happen while he would prepare and then burn incense at the golden altar. Now, it's during this time that people would be outside in silent prayer until the time that the priest would emerge again. You'll remember that Zacharias was a priest who ministered in this way when the Lord revealed that he and Elizabeth were going to have a child. And they were going to call his name John. That appears in Luke 1. Take a look at what that says, because it gives us insight to probably what's happening here in Revelation. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. All right, this seems to have some significance to the picture that we see here in Revelation, because as we're going to see throughout this section, the overtones of priestly work do seem to be present here. Now, additional to that, the devastation that's about to come is so awful and so terrible, no one is going to be able to say a word. Have you ever faced something so unbelievable that your shock leaves you practically speechless? Have you ever sensed how long it seems that time goes? It just seems to slow down in an event such as that. Now, it doesn't, of course, but your awareness and your focus within that distressing moment almost makes you unmindful to anything else that's going on around you. The event will have so arrested your attention, you almost find yourself lost in the moment. Now, consider that in our passage, there's a lot of activity that's going on in heaven. There are the voices of the ones who are crying out from under the altar. The angelic host and the living ones are declaring the holiness of God, and the redeemed are praising God and worshiping Him. But all of a sudden, everything comes to a grinding halt, and dead silence falls all across heaven. And it happens with the opening of this ominous seventh seal and with the seven angels with the seven trumpets. Now, of course, from this seventh trumpet is going to come seven bold judgments. And in fact, all the other parts of Revelation that come forward after this, all the trumpets, all the bowls, are all part of the seventh seal judgment. It's not equal to or repetitions of any part of the first six seal judgments. And I believe that the silence of heaven at this particular moment, it also takes into account the seriousness and the soberness that God Himself feels. Now, obviously, He's not surprised by the judgments. However, the significance of these events and how God views them just ripples its way across all of heaven. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. All right, we see here everything perfected. We got the seventh seal, seven angels, seven trumpets, and from the seventh trumpet is going to come seven bowls. Walvoord, I think, in his commentary provides a good explanation of this. The best interpretation is to take the revelation in its ordinary sense, that is, that these are indeed seven angels appointed by God to direct the series of judgments. These angels are to be distinguished from those who pour out the seven vials and are not to be confused with the seven spirits of God of Revelation 5:6. The fact that these angels stand before God indicates a place of prominence such as is given to the angel Gabriel. Now, concerning the seven trumpets mentioned, there are various uses of trumpets in Israel's history. They were used to call for public assemblies, or perhaps to give directions to men who were on a battlefield, or to announce special events. And they were also used sometimes when the law was given. Now, it seems here in Revelation that the trumpets are for announcements to highlight the information as it's being presented. And this most certainly is an essential event, especially on the calendar of the universe. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Now, we're not told who this other angel is, but coming and standing by the altar, he has a particular service to render. He comes forward to serve as does a priest. Now, you'll note in the verse that it says another angel. And as you're going to see in verse 6, the 7 angels will begin their preparation to sound their trumpets, but this angel that we're talking about here is not among that number. So the question is, who is this? Well, at least this angel has to be one of very high rank. But it's also been suggested that this is possibly the Lord Jesus Christ himself. And this would also fit in that we have already seen him in his priestly attire from chapter 1. Now, if there's concern that Jesus will be called an angel here, we need to consider the Old Testament accounts of the pre-incarnate appearances of Christ, where he is referred to as the angel of the Lord. The connection between the work of the priest within the heavenly vision surely seems to be one that's suited for Jesus as the eternal priest. The altar in this case would be the altar of incense, which was made to provide an aromatic fragrance rising up before the Lord. Now, this altar was covered in gold, and the sweet-smelling smoke rising from it is a biblical type or symbol of the prayers of God's people. The golden censer is a holding bowl in which the fire coals from the altar of burnt offerings were held as the priests carried the fire into the holy place to fire the incense inside. Now, it was customary that while the priest ministered in this way, the people who were outside would pray in silence. Now, of course, this shows the connection between the incense and prayer. But you'll also note that the entire imagery is that of the golden altar being before the throne. Now, when we go back and we consider the tabernacle and the temple, the golden altar was in the holy place. It sat along the walled curtain next to the Holy of Holies. Now, as revealed here in our passage, this altar of incense in heaven is directly in front of the throne, which means that the prayers of God's people are as close to him as they can get. And because the incense represents the prayers of God's people, it's striking here that there was much incense. There's lots of it. And it's all immediately before the Lord. And it's all sweet smelling to him. The answer to all the prayers is about to take place, especially of the martyrs who have been represented beneath the altar. They had asked when their blood would be avenged. Well, the prayers are about to be answered. The characterization is that the incense is offered at the same time as the prayers are offered. They both go up at the same time, accomplishing physically and spiritually the same thing. Verse 4 tells where it goes specifically, and in verse 5, what happens because of it. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it to the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. Now the smoke of the incense slowly ascends before and it goes into the presence of God in the midst of the throne. As it's presented in the priestly fashion, the incense and prayers come from the hand of the angel which holds the golden censer. Now this shows that the fire is already put to the incense. It means that the angel is already at the golden altar with a sweet smell rising before God. As the smoke and the prayers go up, the angel places more fire within the censer. The fact that the smoke is already going up means that the fire is already applied to the incense, but here he again fills the censer with more fire or more coals. And this suggests that the prayers represented will be fired continually as the answer to those prayers begin to be acted out by the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets. The fire comes from the altar of burnt offerings, and it's the place where the coals were gathered for the altar of incense. The picture is really an amazing one. The coals that fueled the sacrifice of the lamb on the altar of burnt offerings were the coals that were brought and fired the incense, that is, now the prayers of God's people before his throne. Without the sacrifice of the lamb, no prayers would go up before God. But with the censer completely filled with fire that will continually deliver the prayers and God's answer to them, the angel casts it down to the earth. Now this means that the earth is the recipient of the final end of these prayers, and it will be the fiery judgment that comes upon the earth straight from the hand of the angel. Do you remember the souls that were under the altar and how they cried concerning when their blood would be avenged? They said, "How long, O Lord?" And the answer was that some of their brethren must also be martyred. Well, with that taking place now, the avenging would also be accomplished. With the casting down of the censer, God's answer to these prayers is about to break loose. And immediately John hears voices, thundering, sees lightning and earthquakes. As you might remember, this is the characterization of the impending judgment of God, as well as the unique unleashing of God's might. Now, the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. God's response to the prayers are about to take place, so the final preparations are made for God's judgment to fall in answer to the prayers that all things be made right. The trumpets, as it were, are raised, a breath is taken, and the instruments are now at their lips. The trumpet blasts of judgment are about to sound out across the heavens. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. With the first angel sounding, hail is the result. In the Old Testament, we've read numerous times about God pouring down massive hailstorms as part of his punishment on evildoers. Such examples appear in Exodus and Psalms. And the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. He gave them hail for rain and flaming fire on their land. Now, of course, this is not just about hail. This hail also has fire mingled with blood. Now, there's a couple of ways that the hail and fire mingled with blood can be taken. First, it could refer to the fact that the hailstorm is also accompanied with massive thunder and lightning storms expansively striking the earth. The blood would be from those caught in the raging fires produced through the lightning. It would also represent those trapped in the open during this unusual hailstorm, and these people are killed. So the mingled would signify the bloodshed resulting from this trumpet judgment. The second approach of interpretation for this still takes the hailstorm and the fire as bolts of lightning, as previously suggested. However, the phrase mingled with blood would be understood as a reference to a phenomenon similar to what is called red snow. Now, in this case, it would be symbolic of the bloodshed that will also come from the global judgment storm and also happening through something similar to red snow. Now, one of the ways that this occurs is when red dust particles become airborne and it mixes with the precipitation. As the snow falls, it appears a pinkish red. Now, if this is what happens, it makes sense that the earlier earthquakes and volcanic eruptions would have sent this red dirt into the atmosphere, and in these massive storms, this red precipitation begins to come down mingled with the lightning and the hail. Now, either of these interpretive approaches is valid. I'd lean toward the first explanation, that the mingled with blood reveals the bloodshed of so many. Regardless, the verse says that 1/3 of all trees and of all the grass was burnt up. Most likely, this is going to come from the fire bolts of lightning, but it would have to be more than just that. I mean, can you imagine? This is not isolated. This is a storm brewing across the globe that affects 1/3 of the entire planet. On top of that, how can it be explained that all the grass burns up? It seems almost unfathomable. But the trees, which are a little more grounded, will survive from being swept away completely. However, the grasses, which are loosely grounded, will be much more vulnerable. So people have begun to realize that this is more than just merely a storm greater than all storms previous to it. For the very ground to be burnt up means that something more than natural is at work here. And if all of that was not bad enough, these things are only the precursor of things to come. And we now come to the second trumpet. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. Okay, the second angel sounds and attention turns heavenward again. But this time it's not merely hailstones. It's like an entire mountain that is on fire falls into the sea. The interpretation for this becomes varied depending on whom you read after. However, here are some of the ideas. Some will make this into a symbol, which is to represent some nation and army that will be cast down. However, if taken literally, which I want to do as much as possible, there are two possibilities. First, it could be a volcanic eruption that explodes with lava and fire, and that its ash falls to the sea in sufficient amounts that 1/3 of the world's sea is contaminated. Now, obviously, this would be on a heightened scale, unlike anything faced on the earth before. Now, second, it could refer to a heavenly body of some kind that would fall to the earth with its fire trail as it enters the atmosphere. You can see that it's not a mountain, but the passage actually states it as it were a mountain. So this speaks to the size and the effect, and that the effect will be much death of natural sea life. And with the waters contaminated, the natural outcome will be a great level of death. Another result is that 1/3 of all ships are going to be destroyed by this. Now, they could be positionally close to the place of greatest impact, causing their destruction. It might also be that the resulting impact on the seas ripples its destructive forces across the world's waters, which destroys the ships also. Now, although not mentioned, we'd have to assume that many people are going to be killed when this trumpet judgment destroys the ships. It would seem that if this mountain is a heavenly body falling, the devastating effect would be localized, but affecting 1/3 of the planet once it hits. Now, as a further result, encroaching on humankind will be the number of sea creatures that are going to die in this. And then they're going to rise to the surface of the sea. More likely, these will wash up along the shorelines of the world. Can you imagine? 1/3 of all sea life dead, and their rotting remains washing ashore like dunes of decaying disease and stench. The result of that is 1/3 of the sea is said to become blood. Now, that's reminiscent of the plague judgments of Egypt, where the rivers were turned to blood. So we realize that the supernatural working of God is also present here in this judgment and the effect that it's going to have. But even so, some have suggested that the blood is a chemical appearance left behind from the burning mountain. Now, this would be the further death of 1/3 of all sea creatures, suggesting a connection between so much death and the blood representing that death. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died because of the waters, because they were made bitter. With the sounding of the third trumpet from the third angel, a massive heavenly body identified as a star falls on the fresh waters, and it's called wormwood. Now, this falling body comes on the heels of devastation from the burning mountain, and this is, as it were, a burning lamp, firing its way to the earth to explode on all clean water. The physical properties of this body, whatever it is, are such as to contaminate 1/3 of all fresh water. Now, in the approach of literal interpretation, this wormwood would probably be a meteorite, or at least a small comet, that would explode on the earth. It comes into the atmosphere burning as it were a lamp. The reference concerning the fountains has to do with fresh water because that's where it originates. It's in extent, it goes to the rivers that carry what is supposed to be fresh water. So there seems to be a scriptural parallel to the bitter waters of Marah in Exodus 15. There, the bitter waters of Marah were made sweet or fresh by casting in a tree. Now here in Revelation, wormwood will do the opposite. It'll make fresh water bitter. The result is that the contaminated water will cause many to die. And I'm sure that as they attempt to try and find water in those days, they will drink the contaminated water, and it's going to be deadly. More people are going to die. Consider the number of people who are dying. I mean, we've already seen that 1.6 billion are likely to die in the earlier seal judgments, and in these trumpet judgments, many, many more are going to die, but it's not over. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. With the sounding of the fourth angel comes the fourth trumpet judgment, and a judgment against the heavenlies, or at least affecting how they are viewed. All other aspects of the earth have been dealt with in judgment. Now, the heavenly bodies are affected as well. Now, it could be that all these other things falling to the ground will send dust clouds into the atmosphere, and this would darken the skies sufficiently that 1/3 of the earth's atmosphere would become thick debris clouds across all of the world's skies. Such would block out the shining of the sun's reflection on the moon, and the clear vision of the stars in the night sky. Then, as the dust passes through the world's skies, this thick cloud cover would affect 1/3 of their cycle of visibility. And the darkness will be so great that in many places, the entire skyline will be temporarily blackened, letting no light in. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. This angel begins announcing all through heaven this terrible news. The first four trumpets have sounded, and the effect of them has gone to the physical universe, for the most part, the earth. However, there is a change that's about to take place. The angel announces three severe woes about to come, not merely to the earth as a heavenly body, but earth's inhabitants. The three other voices and trumpets of the next three angels will fall on people, and that will indeed be woeful and lamentable. And there is a woe announced for each of the remaining three trumpets. But as we've come now to the end of chapter 8 and heard the announcement of coming woes, I think it would behoove us to take a moment for reflection. We're being given warnings of the things that are going to come to pass, which means that we have time to do something about it. Those who are alive at the time of the Great Tribulation will have no choice but to go through it, but there is a choice for you that you can make right now. Is it not wise to take warnings seriously when they're offered for our good? Whether it's facing the Great Tribulation when that time should come, or soon facing death with the prospect of an eternal hell as a result, we need to consider the importance of making sure of Christ in our lives and doing so right now. Now, if you know Jesus as your personal Savior, you're not going to face the Great Tribulation nor hell. But if you don't know the Lord, and if you continue to reject Christ and put off the surrender of your life to Him, the prospect ahead is ominous, it's dreadful, and it's hopeless. So, but Brother Barnes, you're trying to scare me. Well, does the prospect of the judgment of God, both on the earth and in hell, frighten you? It should. And I can't apologize for wanting you to realize that. Listen, that which drove me to accept Christ was my coming to understand the reality of a literal hell and the realness of my spiritually lost state. I came to the Lord and was saved, and I'm glad that I did. I want you to know that joy in your life as well. I implore you to give your heart to Christ today and be saved.